In the stillness of a Nevada night, past midnight on April 28, 2008, two women walked into the Reno Police Department. One was a mother, weary, silent, her face shadowed by sleepless nights. The other, her eldest daughter, stiff with worry, clutching a printed photograph in her hand. A 16-year-old girl named Valerie Kim was missing. For the past 3 days, she hadn't been seen, heard from, or traced by phone. Her room was untouched, her bed undisturbed. Her cell phone had been off since the morning of April 26. There was no note, no message, nothing. At first, the family had assumed she was with a friend. Valerie had always been a bit headstrong, quiet, private. She'd come home late before, but she always came back. This time, she hadn't. Her older sister, Ashley, had spoken with her just before bed that night. They laughed about something silly, maybe a show on TV, maybe a memory from when they were little. Then they each went to their rooms. The next morning, Ashley woke up to silence. Valerie was gone. Their mother, Margaret, tried calling. No answer. She messaged friends. No one had seen her. The second day, panic settled in. On the third, they went to the police. Valerie Kim wasn't just another teenager. She was the youngest of 2 daughters in a family that had already endured its share of hardship. Her mother had raised both girls on her own after a difficult divorce, eventually moving them across the country from New Jersey to Reno. There, she remarried, to a man who barely worked and showed little warmth. Valerie's childhood wasn't violent, but it was hollow. A quiet kind of neglect, buried beneath cheap dinners and long shifts. Her mother worked nights cleaning offices. Her sister worked weekends at a nail salon. And Valerie drifted. In school, she once showed promise. She'd been placed in honors English. Won 2 poetry contests by age 13. Teachers described her as intelligent, if distant. But by high school, things had changed. Her grades slipped. She stopped joining clubs. She barely smiled. Then came the decision that shocked everyone. She dropped out of school. At just 16, Valerie told her family she saw no point in staying. She called education a lie, said the real world was about survival, not textbooks. Her mother tried to talk her out of it. So did her sister. But Valerie wouldn't budge. After that, she started leaving the house at strange hours. Sometimes she was gone all night. Sometimes for 2. She always had excuses. Helping a friend with college applications. Assisting a stylist with weekend work. Just needed air. Her mother wanted to believe her. So did Ashley. But deep down, both of them felt the distance growing, like watching someone fall asleep underwater. The night of April 25th had been ordinary. Valerie was home. They'd eaten dinner. She'd gone to her room early. Around 11, she chatted briefly with Ashley in the hallway. Her voice was calm. Her eyes unreadable. And then, she vanished. When the police took the report, they were polite but restrained. Teenagers go missing. That's what they said. Sometimes they run away. Sometimes they just want space. But even they noticed something. Margaret and Ashley weren't frantic. They were haunted. They didn't believe Valerie was rebelling. They believed something had happened to her. By the following morning, her case had been entered into the Nevada Missing Persons Registry. No leads. No witnesses. No CCTV. Just a name, a face, and the cold fear of not knowing. In the meantime, detectives began their standard check: school records, medical files, browsing history. It didn't take long for something strange to appear. Valerie's internet activity led to encrypted forums, adult services, escort directories, anonymous chat rooms. Not typical for a 16-year-old girl from Midtown Reno. But there it was: user profiles, photo uploads, timestamps. One account listed her under a different name, with blurred photos of someone who looked disturbingly familiar. Petite. Dark eyes. She was offering companionship. Discreet, educated, drama-free, her description said. Rates were listed. Contact was via ICQ, a relic from the early 2000s. Valerie had been using it heavily in the days leading up to her disappearance. And then it all stopped. Her last online message was timestamped 9:16 a.m., April 27th, the same morning she vanished. In it, she confirmed a meeting location with someone using a prepaid, untraceable number. Meet me at Midtown Station. Call when you arrive. At exactly 1:04 p.m., her phone made a 53-second call. After that, it was never turned on again. Who was on the other end? Where had she gone? And more chilling, why had no one seen her since? What had started as a missing persons case had now shifted into something far more dangerous. Valerie Kim hadn't just disappeared. She'd walked into the arms of someone who didn't want her to be found. Every missing person has a backstory. Some are simple, a fight at home, a rush of rebellion. Others are stitched together from silence, stitched so tightly that when they finally tear open, everything spills out at once. For Valerie Kim, that unraveling began quietly, years before anyone noticed. She was born in New Jersey, 1992. The second daughter of Korean immigrants who arrived in America chasing a life they couldn't find in Seoul. Her parents divorced when she was just a toddler. After that, it was always three: her mother Margaret, her older sister Ashley, and Valerie, the quiet one. By the time she was 6, she was already learning how to blend into the background. At school, she was polite, withdrawn, always clutching a library book, always avoiding eye contact. Teachers called her bright but shy. But behind the silence was something heavier. In 2004, Margaret remarried to an American man named Craig Foster. A quiet, unemployed man who rarely left the house. Not abusive. Not violent. Just watching TV. Complaining about bills. Valerie never spoke much to him. She never called him Dad. A year later, the family moved west to Reno, Nevada, hoping things would get easier. But the desert offered no miracles. Margaret worked cleaning offices at night. Ashley picked up shifts at a Vietnamese nail salon. And Valerie, she stayed home. Their apartment sat just above a liquor store in Midtown. 2 bedrooms. 1 window with a view of a brick wall. Margaret never complained. She said it was better than where they'd come from. Valerie enrolled in school, and for a time, things looked hopeful. She was quiet but talented. Won a poetry contest in 8th grade. Wrote essays that made teachers pause. She loved literature, the kind that cut deep, Sylvia Plath, and Sexton, Virginia Woolf. She once told Ashley that sadness was easier to understand than joy. And maybe that was the first sign. As high school began, Valerie changed. She stopped participating in class. Stopped showing up to club meetings. Her grades slipped. Her voice became quieter still. And then came the announcement that no one saw coming. She was dropping out. She was 16. Her GPA had fallen just below 2.0. And she'd made up her mind. "I'm done with school," she told her mother flatly. "It doesn't help people like us." Margaret was devastated. Ashley argued with her for days. But Valerie didn't flinch. It was as if she had already decided that the world had closed its doors, and she would find her own way in through the cracks. And so she left school. After that, she started to dress differently. Darker clothes. Heavier makeup. Her hair changed color twice. She started coming home late. Sometimes not at all. And she always had an excuse. Helping a friend with photo shoots. Working as an assistant for a stylist downtown. It's just a temporary thing. It's good money. She never elaborated. One night, Ashley noticed a new pair of heels in the hallway, expensive ones. Valerie said they were a gift. Another night, Margaret found a lipstick in Valerie's bag that cost more than her monthly groceries. Again a gift. The signs were there. But they were subtle. And when you're poor, exhausted, and just trying to hold things together, you don't always see the storm until it's already inside your home. What the Kim family didn't know was that Valerie had been living a double life. Behind locked doors, she logged onto forums under fake names. Posted vague photos with blurred backgrounds. Advertised companionship, private attention, and no emotional strings. Her prices ranged from $150 to $300 an hour. Some listings offered overnight stays. Some just said, "Let's talk first." She used ICQ, a dying platform few people monitored. She met her clients in quiet motels and back alley parking lots. She called it work. She called it freedom. But it wasn't. It was survival, dressed up in mascara and heels. Somewhere along the way, Valerie had gotten involved with a fake modeling agency. They promised her a portfolio, exposure, even commercial work. But all they gave her was debt. A $6,000 bill for photo shoots she never signed off on. Contracts she couldn't read. Threats she didn't know how to fight. By March of 2008, Valerie had already paid most of it back, one client at a time. But they wanted more. They said she owed interest. They said if she didn't pay, they'd make things public. Send her photos to her family. Post videos online. She was 16. And she was drowning. On the surface, Valerie seemed calm. Her social media was sparse but normal. A photo of a sunset here, a coffee cup there. She barely posted. Barely existed online. But inside, something was crumbling. Ashley remembers one night, 2 weeks before Valerie disappeared. Her sister came home late, face pale, hands shaking. She didn't say what happened, Ashley later told detectives. But she just collapsed on the couch. And said, "I messed up. I thought I could fix it. But it's worse now." Then she went to her room and locked the door. It was the only time she cried in front of Ashley since they were kids. And then, 1 week later, Valerie was gone. No note. No message. Just a gap where she used to be. But her secrets weren't gone. They were waiting, buried in her laptop, her chat logs, her online footprints. And when the detectives finally began digging, they found her. Or at least, the version of her that the world was never meant to see. In a digital world built on shadows, Valerie Kim left a trail. It wasn't a bright one. Not the kind made of smiling selfies or shared Spotify playlists. Hers was quieter, hidden beneath layers of aliases, private accounts, and encrypted forums, a fragile lifeline strung between desperation and survival. The detectives started with her internet provider. After hours of waiting on subpoenas and digging through usage logs, they found something, a consistent pattern of access to a forum called Crimson Eve. It wasn't a place you'd stumble into by accident. Crimson Eve billed itself as a refined private network for adult companionship. Its homepage looked like an old luxury perfume ad, gold script over a black background, low piano music humming in the distance. But once inside, the reality was far more direct. Profiles. Listings. Usernames like Velvet Hour, Motel Muse, and Wishbone Girl 18. Services. Prices. Locations. It didn't take long to find her. The girl calling herself Maymoon had uploaded 3 blurred photographs. All slightly out of focus, carefully cropped to conceal her face. But to the trained eyes of law enforcement, and especially to her own sister, there was no mistaking it. The girl in the photos was Valerie. Petite frame. Soft neckline. The same birthmark near her collarbone that had shown up once in a family photo. The same silver necklace she always wore, shaped like a crescent moon, a birthday gift from Ashley. Her profile was simple, kind, quiet, well-read, discreet. If you need company without questions, I'm here. Cash only. Midtown only. Weeknights preferred. ICQ or prepaid only. Next to it was a list of services and an hourly rate, $250 per session. Overnight companionship $500. Most of the posts had gone unnoticed, buried under dozens of newer listings. But one comment stood out, posted on April 20th, just a week before her disappearance. Met her last weekend. She's shy but gentle. Something about her seemed sad. Paid for 2 hours, stayed for 3. No drama. Would recommend. The username that left that review was Silverage75. Detective Nina Delgado cross-referenced the account with the site's IP logs. It was traced to a residential broadband line in Carson City, 45 minutes outside Reno. The subscriber was Brian Keller, a 36-year-old accountant with no criminal record. He became the first real lead. Brian Keller lived in a beige single-story house with a white fence and a dog that barked at every breeze. When Detective Delgado knocked on the door, he opened it almost instantly. His face was pale. His eyes, anxious. He didn't even wait for the question. "I saw her photo on the news," he said. "I was going to come in. I didn't know how." Inside, he spoke with the slow, careful cadence of someone both ashamed and terrified. Yes, he had met Valerie. Though he didn't know her real name. They had spoken through ICQ. Arranged to meet near Midtown Station. That was the agreement. Short meet, private motel, no questions. I didn't hurt her, Brian repeated more than once. According to him, they met on the night of April 26th. Valerie wore all black, hoodie, jeans, yellow canvas bag. She seemed tired. Not just physically but emotionally worn out. She said very little. Smiled even less. I tried to talk with her, Brian recalled. Not about sex. Just to see who she was. She reminded me of someone I used to know. They checked into the Cascade Inn, a cheap motel off 4th Street. They didn't have sex. They just lay there, talking a little, then sleeping. In the morning, around 9 a.m., Valerie left. That was the last time he saw her. When she didn't respond to his follow-up messages, he assumed she'd blocked him. Then he saw her face on the evening news. And his stomach dropped. He provided everything, the ICQ logs, the payment receipts, even security footage from the motel that showed her walking out alone. It all checked out. Brian Keller had been truthful. But what he couldn't answer was the most important question. Where did Valerie go next? That answer came from another piece of data, her phone. At 1:04 p.m. on April 27th, Valerie had made one final phone call. The number she dialed was a prepaid burner phone, unregistered, untraceable. The call lasted exactly 53 seconds. After that, her phone shut off completely. Through her ICQ logs, detectives found a conversation time-stamped 9:16 a.m. that same morning. The message read, "I'll be there around 1. I'll call when I get close. Please don't be late." The user she was messaging used the handle nighttide09. The account had been created just 4 days earlier. All messages came from the same IP address, a broadband line registered to Yenfield Apartments, a rundown residential complex on the edge of North Reno. The specific unit? Apartment 2B. The subscriber? Unknown. It was either a rental under cash terms or someone squatting under a false name. But that location, Apartment 2B, would soon become central to everything that followed. Detective Delgado knew that whatever happened to Valerie, it started there. And maybe, just maybe, it ended there too. The building stood at the edge of North Reno like a forgotten afterthought. A low-rise apartment complex with flaking paint, rusted mailboxes, and a broken buzzer that hadn't worked in years. Locals called it the Stack, a place where tenants came and went, where nobody asked questions, and where too many names never made it onto the lease. Apartment 2B had no listed resident, no utility account, no emergency contact. But according to internet records, that's where the messages had come from, the ICQ handle nighttide09, the burner phone Valerie called before she vanished, and the digital footprints that all led to the same, single unit. Detective Nina Delgado parked across the street just after dusk on May 5th. She wasn't alone. Surveillance vans were positioned along both corners, and plainclothes officers were quietly blending in with the foot traffic outside the laundromat next door. They waited. For hours, the door to 2B remained shut. Then, just after 11 p.m., someone appeared. A tall man, pale, heavy-set, wearing a hooded jacket despite the warmth of the night. He walked with a casual gait, carrying a grocery bag in one hand and keys in the other. He didn't glance around. Didn't pause. Just slid the key into the door of 2B and disappeared inside. They had him. Within seconds, Delgado gave the signal. Officers moved fast. The building echoed with rushed footsteps, the snap of latex gloves, and the crack of a forced door. Inside apartment 2B, the air was stale, thick with the smell of bleach and something else harder to name. The man was subdued within seconds. Almost passive. As if he knew this moment had been coming. His name was Caleb Frost. 25 years old. No job. No current ID. No social media. No criminal record. And yet, something about him felt cold. Not dangerous in the way loud men are. But in the quiet, thoughtful way of someone who plans things. Someone who watches more than he speaks. As officers swept the apartment, what they found made the room go still. There was blood. Everywhere. Small traces at first, along the baseboards of the bathroom, in the seams of the shower curtain, underneath a rug. But then they found more. On the chair at the desk. On the carpet near the bed. On the inside lining of a discarded canvas tote bag, yellow. Just like the one Valerie had last been seen carrying. Detective Delgado stepped carefully through the space. It wasn't a large apartment, but it felt endless. Every detail screamed of recent, hurried cleaning. But not enough. Under a UV light, the bathroom lit up in streaks. The drains still bore the reddish haze of diluted blood. Even the toilet had been scrubbed raw. And yet the smell lingered. Later that night they tested samples. The results came back fast. The blood belonged to Valerie Kim. She had been in apartment 2B. She had bled there. And she had never left. In the interview room, Caleb Frost said nothing for over an hour. He stared blankly at the wall, breathing in steady rhythms. When finally asked if he knew Valerie Kim, he responded with a single sentence. She was kind. That was it. No denial. No panic. Just 3 words, spoken like a memory. When pressed harder, Caleb changed his story. She came over. We talked. We did drugs. Then I went to sleep. And when I woke up, she was dead. The detective's pen froze. Caleb said she had overdosed. That she'd collapsed. That he had panicked. That he didn't know what to do. That he had tried to revive her, but it was too late. But something didn't fit. Valerie's toxicology wouldn't come in for weeks, but the blood, the sheer amount of it, told a different story. And then came the part that turned the case from tragic to monstrous. I didn't want anyone to find her, Caleb finally whispered. So I handled it. What do you mean by handled it? His eyes flicked up for the first time. I made her disappear. Later that night, as detectives continued to search the apartment, they found more. A plastic container in the kitchen. A pig bone bin from a local butcher shop. Inside, remnants that weren't pork. A series of knives lined up beneath the sink. Several pieces of torn clothing hidden inside a vent shaft. And worst of all, a stained mattress, flipped and pressed tight to the wall. Every item led back to the same conclusion. Caleb Frost had not just disposed of a body. He had dismembered it. The next morning, under heavy escort, Caleb was taken to a lake on the edge of the city. That's where he said he had tossed her head, inside a sealed bag weighted with stones. Divers searched for hours. They found nothing. Back at the apartment, plumbing experts were brought in. They traced the drains from Unit 2B to the neighborhood sewage system. Inside one of the nearby waste access points, they recovered what appeared to be organic fragments, tiny, decaying, unrecognizable. DNA later confirmed they belonged to Valerie Kim. She hadn't just been murdered. She had been destroyed, piece by piece. And yet, in that destruction, she had left behind a trail, a final scream from the shadows, made of fingerprints and blood, IP addresses and burner calls. Enough to find him. Enough to stop him. And enough to ensure that the world would never forget what was done inside apartment 2B. There's a moment in every investigation where silence gives way to truth. Not the kind of truth whispered in a panic, or blurted out to shift blame, but the heavy kind. The kind that arrives slowly, breath by breath, as a person comes face to face with what they've done. For Caleb Frost, that moment came 36 hours after his arrest. At first, he said little. Claimed he found Valerie dead. That it was drugs. That he panicked. But then the autopsy report arrived. There were no lethal drugs in Valerie's system. There was, however, deep bruising on her neck. Evidence of prolonged pressure. Burst blood vessels in the eyes. Internal damage consistent with manual strangulation. She hadn't overdosed. She had been murdered. When presented with the findings, Caleb blinked slowly. Then, for the first time, he asked for water. What followed was nearly 4 hours of quiet, flat-toned monologue, interrupted only by the scratching of Detective Delgado's pen. This is what he said. He had met Valerie online. Not just once, several times. She was quiet, professional, always on time, always alone. She reminded him, he said, of someone he once knew. A girl in high school. Someone who never looked him in the eye. He liked that. On April 27th, he messaged her again. He told her he needed company. Someone to talk to. He promised it would be safe. She agreed. They met at Midtown Station. He remembered her outfit in detail: black jeans, long sleeves, that same yellow canvas bag. They walked to his apartment in silence. Once inside, she sat on the couch, took off her shoes. He offered her something to drink. She said no. Then he asked if she wanted to unwind. He meant drugs. He offered her a line of something powdered. She hesitated. He told her it was just Xanax, crushed and mixed. Said it would take the edge off. She nodded, took it, coughed hard, but didn't speak. 15 minutes passed. Then he sat beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched. That was when, in his words, something cracked. He said her rejection triggered a memory, something from when he was younger, something buried. A humiliation, a fight, a slap. He didn't explain further. Just said, I snapped. He claimed the rest was a blur. He remembered being on top of her. He remembered her struggling. He remembered the sound she made, not a scream, but something softer, like a breath trying to escape. He held her neck for a minute or two, maybe more. He wasn't sure. He said her eyes rolled back, that she stopped moving, that her hands went limp. And then, it was quiet. Just the sound of the fan spinning overhead. Just the hum of the refrigerator. Just silence. He sat there for several minutes, staring at her body. At first, he panicked. Then, something changed. The fear gave way to calculation. He told police that dismemberment wasn't planned. But once the idea appeared, it made sense. He had no car. No place to dump a full body. But pieces? Pieces were manageable. He had studied meat processing during a part-time job at a butcher's shop 2 years earlier. Said he remembered how to cut around joints. How to separate limbs without damaging bone. How to keep the skin intact. It took him 6 hours. He laid down plastic. Used kitchen knives. Drained the blood into the shower. Flushed smaller pieces down the toilet. Placed the bones inside a pig bone container. Drove to a nearby market and mixed them in with pork leftovers at an open-air stall. As for her head, that required something else. He put it in a duffel bag. Took a public bus to Sparks Marina. And just before dawn, he threw it into the water. Caleb denied taking photos. Denied being aroused by it. Denied being one of those types. Said it was all just about erasing the problem. As if Valerie's death was a mess to be cleaned, not a life to be mourned. Detectives didn't believe him. Not entirely. But they didn't need to. His confession was enough. The timeline matched. The forensics matched. The ICQ logs. The burner phone. The blood in the pipes. The fragments recovered from the sewer. All of it pointed to one truth. Valerie Kim had been killed inside apartment 2B. And Caleb Frost had made sure almost nothing was left. Almost. The part that haunted investigators the most wasn't the crime. It was the calm. The way Caleb spoke. No emotion. No regret. No anger. Just clinical detachment. Like someone describing a recipe or giving step-by-step instructions on how to disassemble a machine. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't incoherent. He was precise. He was aware. He was empty. At one point, when asked why, Caleb looked up for the first time in hours and said, "She looked like someone who thought she was better than me. I wanted that look to go away." And it did. Forever. Long after the cameras stopped flashing. Long after Caleb Frost had confessed. There was still one question left unanswered. Where was the rest of her? He had claimed to flush most of Valerie's body down the toilet, piece by piece, over the course of a night. Fingers. Toes. Flesh. Tissue. Organs. At first, detectives dismissed it as implausible. No one, not even someone as disturbingly calm as Caleb, could pull that off. Not with a kitchen knife. Not in an old apartment in North Reno. But then the forensics came back. Hair fragments were found in the U-bend of the bathroom sink. Traces of blood clung to the wax seal under the toilet base. And worse, the city sewer plant confirmed a spike in solid waste pressure just one day after Valerie disappeared. Suddenly, it didn't seem so far-fetched. Suddenly, the sewer system became a crime scene. On May 8th, under the coordination of the Reno Water and Waste Management Department, crews in hazmat suits descended into the underground tunnels below Yenfield Apartments. It was a maze, old, rusted piping choked with decades of decay. The section beneath Caleb Frost's unit led to a main junction that flowed into the South Truckee Meadows Water Reclamation Facility, where waste from over 60,000 residents converged before being chemically treated and released. It was here, in the darkness of pipes no one was meant to see, that they found it. Blockage. Sticky. Unnatural. Crews pumped out the buildup, sifted through the foul slurry by hand, and inside one pocket of compacted debris, lodged beneath a corroded maintenance valve, they pulled out something that stopped them cold. Over 24 organic fragments. Some still bearing tissue. Some already partially decomposed. All of it unmistakably human. The samples were rushed to the lab. Over 72 hours, DNA testing was performed on each piece. And every one of them came back the same. Valerie Kim. Her cells. Her flesh. Her story, not silenced, but literally woven into the very infrastructure beneath the city. The sewer system had become her grave. It was the single most disturbing discovery many of the technicians had ever witnessed. And it forced the team to reevaluate the full scope of what had happened. This wasn't just a murder. It was erasure, anatomical, methodical, deliberate erasure. One particularly chilling detail came from a sewage engineer who worked the dredging shift. He said that when they were tapping pipes to test for obstruction, one segment made a hollow, muted echo, unlike any blockage he'd encountered. Inside that pocket, wedged among the sludge and waste, was something unusual, a necklace. Silver. Shaped like a crescent moon. Still intact. Still whole. Ashley Kim identified it 3 days later. It was a birthday gift, she said quietly. She never took it off. It had survived everything. The rest of Valerie had not. Meanwhile, a second investigation had begun, this time above ground. Caleb Frost had claimed to dump Valerie's head in Sparks Marina, a man-made lake east of Reno. Police divers were dispatched immediately. They scoured the waters in tight grid formations, dragged sonar devices across the silt. They found nothing. No bag. No bones. No skull. It was gone, scattered, decomposed, or perhaps never thrown there at all. For all they knew, it had been destroyed another way, or placed somewhere no one would ever look. Without it, the medical examiner was forced to rely solely on secondary evidence: the blood pattern, the torso fragments, the bruised cartilage of the larynx retrieved from the waste flow. Enough to confirm strangulation. Enough to confirm murder. But not enough to return Valerie whole. Not even close. Back at the apartment, the damage remained. Despite cleanup efforts, the blood had soaked into the floorboards. The tub had to be removed. The toilet was deemed unusable. New tenants would never be allowed to move in. Apartment 2B was sealed indefinitely, condemned in silence. No candles. No flowers. Just a padlock and a scar on the city's map. The final piece came from the public market. In the week after Valerie's disappearance, Caleb had visited a local butcher stall where he used to work, casually dropping off what he claimed were pig bones for disposal. He handed them off in a sealed bag. The vendor, an older man who barely remembered his name, had assumed they were leftovers from a hunting trip or maybe a neighbor's dog. He tossed them into the bin. Those bones were never recovered. They had long since been processed, packaged, sold to local buyers. The idea that parts of Valerie Kim may have entered the food supply chain was horrifying. Unprovable, yes, but horrifying all the same. The city health department issued an internal investigation. The stall was shut down. But the damage had already been done. For the Kim family, none of it mattered. There would be no body to bury. No casket to lower into the ground. No grave to visit. Valerie existed now only in fragments, scattered beneath concrete, swept through treatment plants, flushed into open water. But her story would not go down the drain. Her story would surface, again and again, as a reminder of how evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it calculates. And sometimes it flushes the evidence, one piece at a time. By the summer of 2009, the city of Reno had moved on, at least on the surface. The headlines had faded. The search had ended. The crime scene was sealed. And the drains beneath the city still flowed. But for those who knew Valerie Kim, and for those who had followed the story since the beginning, there was one final reckoning left. Justice. The trial of Caleb Frost opened on July 13, 2009, at the Washoe County Courthouse. Security was tight. Public interest was high. Every news outlet from Las Vegas to Portland sent reporters. Outside the courthouse, a silent crowd formed, many carrying signs that read, "Her name was Valerie. Not forgotten. No plea for monsters." Inside, the air was heavy. Caleb appeared calm, just as he had been during his confession. Dressed in a plain beige jumpsuit, he avoided eye contact. Said nothing. He didn't plead guilty. He didn't plead innocent. He let his court-appointed attorney speak for him. The prosecution, led by Assistant DA Lorraine Vega, painted a picture the jury could not unsee. They described Valerie as a 16-year-old girl from a broken home, bright, wounded, trying to survive. They told of her descent into escort work, of the manipulative modeling scam, of the mounting debt and threats. But most of all, they told the story of what happened inside apartment 2B. They showed evidence, photos of the bloodstains, fragments from the sewer, the silver crescent necklace, the butcher knives with flesh particles still embedded in their grooves. And then, they played the audio. During Caleb's confession, a section had been recorded. It wasn't required by law, but Delgado had turned on the recorder just before leaving the room. She'd left him alone, thinking the session was over. He didn't know the mic was still live. On tape, his voice was calm, almost dreamy. She made this sound, right when she stopped breathing. Like a sigh. I remember thinking, that's the quietest I've ever heard anyone be. You could hear the air leave the courtroom. The defense tried. They argued diminished capacity. They brought in a psychologist from Carson City who testified that Caleb showed signs of dissociative detachment, possibly stemming from early childhood trauma. That his history of drug use had warped his sense of reality. That he may not have been fully conscious during the murder. They even used the word automatism. But it didn't hold. The state brought in its own experts. A forensic psychiatrist from UC Berkeley testified that Caleb had no signs of psychosis. That his behavior wasn't compulsive, it was controlled, methodical, strategic. There is no disorder that makes you cut up a body and dispose of it over 6 hours with this level of precision, the doctor said. The courtroom agreed. On the 5th day, Margaret Kim took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. She spoke of Valerie's birth. Her poetry. Her laugh. The way she chewed her nails. The way she hummed while doing laundry. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know what she was going through. I didn't know she was hurting that badly. I should have known." Across the room, Caleb sat motionless. He never looked up. When Ashley Kim was called, she brought with her a single item, Valerie's crescent moon necklace, now restored, hanging from a chain. "I wear it now," she said, "to remind myself, not of how she died, but of how she kept going." On day 6, the verdict came in. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Caleb Frost was found guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated desecration of a human corpse, obstruction of lawful burial. The judge delivered the sentence that same afternoon. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. And for the desecration charge, an additional 15 years to be served consecutively. There would be no appeals. No closing statements. No apology. Caleb said nothing as he was led away. The city didn't rejoice. There was no catharsis. No happy ending. But there was something else. A quiet resolve that spread through schools, youth shelters, community centers. Donations were made in Valerie's name. A scholarship was started at her former high school. Workshops on digital safety and youth trauma were held in her memory. And Ashley Kim, once a quiet college student, began speaking at those events. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told the truth. About what happened. About what happens when we look the other way. About how predators don't always wear masks, sometimes they just live down the hall. Valerie's story didn't end in that courtroom. It became something larger. Not a cautionary tale, but a call to care. A warning that not all wounds bleed. Some hide behind smiles. Some disappear in plain sight. And some, like Valerie, leave behind only fragments. In basements, in drains, in hearts that we'll never forget. Sometimes, stories don't end where we think they will. Not at the verdict. Not in the sentencing. Not when the cameras leave and the headlines fade. For the Kim family, and for those who had come to know Valerie's story, even from a distance, the trial wasn't closure. It was a mirror. A mirror that showed them the cracks in their home. The silence between words. The dangers of looking away. Valerie Kim was 16 when her life was taken. But she was more than a victim. She was a girl who once loved poetry, who stayed up late sketching in the margins of old textbooks. A girl who hummed songs while brushing her hair. Who wore thrift store sweaters and taped up her favorite book covers so they wouldn't fall apart. She was a sister. A daughter. A survivor, long before she became a statistic. Her life was complicated. She made choices. Some were brave. Some were desperate. But all of them were human. In the year following the trial, Ashley Kim began writing. Not a book. Not a blog. Just letters. One for every year Valerie had lived. One for every year she never got to see. They weren't filled with anger. They were filled with memory. The time Valerie got her first library card. The time she cried when they moved from New Jersey. The time she made Ashley laugh so hard she dropped her phone into the sink. Each letter ended the same way. I'm sorry I didn't ask more. I'm sorry I didn't stay up that night. I hope you knew how much I loved you. The city of Reno passed a local initiative in Valerie's name, Project Crescent. It funded after-school programs for at-risk youth, provided therapy for trauma survivors, and built digital literacy workshops for teens navigating the online world alone. No one could bring Valerie back, but they could make sure fewer girls fell through the same cracks. And as for apartment 2B, it was gutted, walls torn down, pipes removed. The building was renovated, repainted, and quietly reopened as a transitional housing space for young women fleeing abuse and exploitation. On the door that used to be hers, a new plaque was mounted. It didn't list her name. It just said, "Let no one be forgotten here." Years later, a documentary team interviewed Ashley Kim. She stood by the lake where Valerie's head was never found. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just looked into the water and said, "Sometimes when people die, we make them symbols. But my sister wasn't a symbol. She was a girl. A messy, beautiful, lonely girl. And I loved her." Then she walked away. And the camera stayed on the water. Still, silent, reflecting the sky. Because some stories don't end. Some stories ripple. And in those ripples, the light that remains isn't just memory. It's action. It's change. It's the quiet vow we make, to notice, to care, to speak, to ask, to never, ever let another girl disappear without a sound.